rose slowly, the heavy scent of dust and dry earth invading your still sleepy nostrils. Beneath your bare feet, the hot stone ground transmitted a rigidity that seemed to sap all your energy. The morning sun barely touched the thick foliage that surrounded the palace gardens. The silence was interrupted only by the rustling of bushes and the persistent buzzing of insects hidden among the leaves. Your work began now, and there was no time for distractions. You cleaned the statues worn by the sand, the rough touch of the stone beneath your hands, reminding you that any slip could cost dearly. Around you, the flowers exuded a sweet, almost cloying perfume that contrasted with the damp, moldy smell near the fountains. The meticulous care of each plant concealed secrets you knew were deadly, poisonings, traps, silent politics. As you pruned the twisted branches, you felt the invisible weight of eyes watching every move you made. The exhausting routine repeated itself. Sometimes you regulated the flow of crystal clear water. Other times, your fingers brushed the rough leaves, aware that in this garden, every gesture could mean the difference between life and death. The garden breathed with a whisper of antiquity, the dry air carrying the faintest traces of burnt resin and linen long decayed. Pale shafts of light filtered through the canopy in hesitant streams, painting the cracked marble paths with spots of shifting gold. Your eyes darted briefly to the horizon, where the sprawling city lay asleep beneath a haze of distant dust and rising heat. It was a realm out of time, the kind that no modern rush or beep could penetrate. If today a low battery sparked despair, here the last flicker of life in a fragile flame meant far more than a fading screen. It meant survival itself. Your hands moved slowly over the statues again, tracing the worn carvings, each curve eroded, but still telling stories of long-forgotten gods and promises whispered in shadowed palaces. The air was thick with the scent of faded petals and moist stone, inching its way beneath your skin. You adjusted a delicate vine choking the base of a fountain, your fingers careful not to disturb the hidden thorns that might drip venom if provoked. Every breath drew in a mixture of heaviness and sweetness that seemed to seep into your bones. Minutes stretched endlessly. You measured the water's flow by sound, the gentle splash, a quiet companion in your solitary vigil. Occasionally, a dull shimmer of heat would pulse lightly across your skin, reminding you the sun was already gathering strength beyond the cool shadows. The quiet around you held attention, as if the garden itself was watching alongside you, its secrets folded tightly within the twisting leaves. Then, suddenly, an odd stillness fell. The usual hum of insects ceased abruptly. Even the subtle rustle of the wind seemed to hush. The faint barking of distant dogs stilled to nothing, replaced by an uncanny silence that wrapped around your shoulders like a cold cloak. Nearby, you caught the shadow of something shifting just beyond the hedges, too subtle, too deliberate to be imagined. Eyes, unseen, yet unyielding, fixed upon you in silence. You paused, breath shallow, heart steady, but keenly aware. The impossible quiet alert to the faintest change. The garden's deadly secrets had not yet revealed their full measure, and your next move would determine your fate. Hey, before Morpheus takes you all the way, do a quick check to see if you're still subscribed. For some, the button disappeared, and I don't want you to miss the next sleep stories. While you're at it, leave a like soft as a pillow. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? Your interaction keeps this little haven of calm alive. Thanks for being part of it. You remained still. The cold presence of the garden's ancient shadows folding quietly around you as the unnatural silence endured. The usual buzz had vanished, like a breath held too long, and in that absence, every rustle of leaf and crackle of dry earth felt impossibly sharp. Your skin prickled with the weight of unseen eyes, not just watching, but waiting, anticipating the faintest misstep. Each sound, or startling lack thereof, pressed against your ears, steadying your breath into a slow, deliberate rhythm. Your hands hovered above the stone basin of the fountain once more, where the water's steady trickle had been silenced, replaced by a hushed emptiness that stretched and thinned the very air. The cool marble beneath your palms felt emptier, colder now, as if the pulse of life in this place had paused, holding its breath with you. You traced a slow circle around the carved basin, noting again the faint but distinct shimmer of moss growing where sunlight barely reached. The dampness clung to your fingertips like a secret, faintly earthy, with a suggestion of something sharper beneath the sweet mold scent. A warning. Slowly you stepped back from the fountain, the stone cool and unforgiving beneath your bare feet. The garden, a tangle of foreboding beauty, seemed to close in, twisting branches leaning just slightly more, scents growing heavier, the air thickening with an undeniable tension. You felt it then, the subtle movement at the edge of your vision, a shift in shadow that almost vanished before you could pin it down. Your pulse slid just beneath your skin, a quiet drum, but you forced your limbs to remain calm, deliberate. Your bare toes found the cracked marble path, each crease worn smooth by countless feet before yours, a soft heat radiating with the rising sun, but faint against the chill in your breath. You moved forward slowly, intentionally, every footfall measured, heel touches first, then toes, the weight shifting carefully. The sun cast latticed patterns through the leaves above, dappling the stones with light that shifted and danced, like fleeting promises of warmth amid the stillness. The flowers you had tended earlier lingered in the senses, some blooming, some wilting, each petal curling and fading like a whispered secret. You inhaled slowly, the heavy perfume thick in your chest, a mixture of sweetness clawed with decay. Somewhere below, roots tangled unseen, twisting and clutching earth that held stories you dared not hear. You brushed a leaf from a blossom. Its surface was waxy, cold, almost unnervingly lifeless, despite its vibrant hue. The slightest hesitation flared inside you, but you pressed on, fingers gliding over the smooth stem, careful not to disturb hidden thorns or trigger latent poisons. Ahead, a narrow corridor of clipped hedges formed a tunnel of green darkness, the light less certain beneath their canopy. You stepped into it, your footsteps muffled against the earth below, the scent shifting suddenly, drier now, with a faint trace of burnt wood, a smoky whisper on the breeze that felt somehow too close. The shifting shadows pressed closer, and your skin grew tense, every nerve stretching quiet warnings. For a moment, your eyes caught a faint glimmer, halfway through the tight passage, a sliver of movement, almost invisible, tucked behind a twisted branch. You froze, breath held so long, it burned in your lungs. The world seemed smaller here, as if the walls themselves inclined to listen, to watch. You stepped slowly, each movement deliberate, with the softness of a feather landing, the subtle creak of leaf veins bending beneath your hand, sounding like thunder within your chest. You reached the end of the hedge corridor, where the garden opened to a wider terrace, strewn with cracked mosaics and ancient urns, their once radiant tiles dulled beneath layers of dust. The terrace held an eerie calm, washed in the gray light of morning, chilled despite the sun's higher reach. You allowed your gaze to drift upward, across the worn stone balustrades and into the skyline, where the distant city stirred faintly beneath mist and haze. The pervasive silence remained, unbroken save for the uneven drip of water somewhere far away, or the distant groan of shifting stone. You knelt beside an overturned urn, its jagged edge sharp against your hands, and thought of the countless moments carved into this garden's memory. The weight of lingering eyes pressed heavier with every heartbeat, but you bent lower, brushing dust with trembling fingers to reveal faded inscriptions, worn words that resisted your understanding but pulsed with latent portent. You lingered there, hand poised, senses alert to the faintest changes, the barely audible scrape of stone shifting, the distant flutter of wings high above, the subtle tightening of the air. A sudden sharp breeze spiraled through the terrace, carrying with it a scent sharper now, cinnamons and smoke, and something unfamiliar that clung like frost in the marrow of your bones. You shivered despite the warmth, shivers that echoed the final seconds of silent warning. Rising slowly, your gaze swept again over the garden's expanse. The flowers seemed silently watchful. The stones beneath your feet whispered dread in their stillness. And beyond the trees, the city sprawled, pale and fragile, under the relentless sun. For a heartbeat, you let your eyes rest on the horizon, a flicker of unease stirring in the pit of your stomach, as a shadow detached itself from the trees, slow and deliberate, moving between branches like a wraith summoned by the breath of the garden itself. You stepped back a single pace, your breath catching softly, and then from the corner of your eye, you glimpsed a figure watching. Just a shape, still and silent, but impossibly close. The garden exhaled around you, the faint pulse of menace weaving tighter as you realized tonight would not come quietly. You stepped back, the imbalance of shadow seeming to ripple around you as the figure held its quiet vigil. The heavy garden air pressed against your skin like a damp cloth, each breath drawing in sharp hints of smoldering wood and cold stone. There was no sound except the uneven thump of your heart, keeping secret time beneath your ribs. The world shrinking to the narrow corridor of your vision, where that shape lingered still, the edges of leaves, coated in creeping moss, blurred at the corner of your eye, as if the garden itself breathed silently around you, watching, waiting, locked in a stillness that carried the weight of something older than the stones beneath your feet. Your feet found the marble path again, cool against your soles, worn smooth by countless untold footsteps long past. You moved forward without haste. The cracked mosaics beneath sparkled faintly with grayed dust, their faded patterns a quiet echo of a world now folded into the soft ravages of time. Each step was measured, minute shifts of weight, heel to toe, the bare skin feeling every imperfection in the stone, a sensory thread connecting you to the lingering pulse beneath it all. The sunlight, through sparse leaves, struck dappled shapes along your arms and face, gentle but insistent. Though it spilled warm, the air resisted the heat, thick with the scent of dry earth and the faint bitterness of something burning just out of sight. As you approached the terrace's edge, the perfume of flowers thickened again. It was a heavy sweetness, tangled with a metallic hint, like bruised fruit forgotten on the vine. A brittle breeze stirred the delicate petals, causing tiny cascades of dust to drift upward in slow spirals, each mote catching a glint of sun before descending back to earth. You reached out and brushed a stray bloom between your fingers, noting the delicate texture, rugged with fine veins, the faint resistance beneath your touch. The thorns hid close, their shadows sharp against the softness. Your breath slowed, even as a faint tremble passed through your body, an almost imperceptible echo of the garden's quiet menace. Far beyond the wall of hedge, the city exhaled faint whispers, distant, fragile currents of sound that barely disturb the thick stillness here. You listened, breath patient, to the threatening silence that seemed only to deepen. It pulled tight around your senses, pinching the edges of your sight, until the terrace seemed a fragile island, perched precariously between past and present, life and the creeping decay that laced the air. The ancient urns stood as silent sentinels, their surface cracked and uneven, shelters for dust and shadowed memories, pressed thick as the moss that clung to their bases. Your fingers traced a rough edge, fingertips absorbing the chill from the stone. The echo of forgotten hands etched faintly into the grain. You knelt slowly beside one urn, the earth muffling your movement. Each breath a deliberate measure of sound and shadow. The weight of those unseen eyes lay like second skin, prickling along your neck, crawling over your shoulders. The garden exhaled faintly, a quiet vibration pulsing through the stones. There was a distant, interrupted drip, an irregular fall of water that fractured the silence momentarily before melting back into the hush. You leaned in again, tracing the worn inscription, the letters almost eroded beyond recognition, but pulsing still beneath the dust, inviting, warning. A sudden rustle from the far edge of the terrace yanked your gaze upward like a taut cord. The leaves stirred, a whisper of movement against branches, where faint shafts of light caught the broken pattern of bark. Your heart tightened, your skin tightened. The scent of smoke rose more sharply now, layered with something pungent. Cinnamon and burnt resin clashed with the earthiness you'd grown used to. The breeze caught in your hair, chilling the nape of your neck. Slowly, you rose, muscles tense but deliberate, as you stepped toward the shaded alcove at the terrace's boundary. The garden seemed to contract around you, the twisting branches forming a natural barrier, heavy with the scent of fermentation and decay. You felt the pulse of ancient secrets wrapped like vines around your ankles, difficult to shake loose. Ahead, the shadows deepened, pooling like ink, a dark mirror beneath the last flicker of light. Deliberately, you entered the shadows, your bare feet finding soft earth beneath cracked stone fragments. Each step was cautious, mindful of the hidden thorns and brittle bones of fallen leaves that crunched faintly underfoot, a sound sharp and foreign in this muted world. You paused, listening. The silence pressed. The garden held its breath with you. Then, ahead, a faint glimmer cracked the dusk, a flash of something too bright and sudden, like a spark caught in a net of darkness. Instinct rippled through your body, but your limbs moved slow, as if time itself had thickened around your will. The figure from before had shifted, its form vague but unmistakably close, just beyond line of sight, watching with unblinking attention. Your gaze locked on that space, every nerve alert to the scent of smoke and the sharp tang of cinnamon that now filled your lungs. It was a moment stretched thin between breaths, a fragile thread that could snap at any instant. Yet you did not move away. In branches, you held your breath, knowing with quiet certainty that the night was coming. But this was only the first note in its slow and weighty song. You stood frozen, the weight of the garden pressing firmly against your skin. Shadows clung to every corner, stretching and twisting like silent sentries that had waited centuries to observe a single misstep. The air grew heavier, thick with the scent of smoldering wood, tangled faintly with bitter earth, an unspoken warning seeping into your lungs, slow and deliberate. Your bare feet found the cracked marble once more, cool beneath calloused soles, each step measured and intentionally slow. The faint, uneven drip of distant water echoed behind you, as if marking time, a subtle metronome in the otherwise still world. Beneath your fingers, the rough stone edges of the urn remained cold and unforgiving, its surface spotted, with moss that curled patiently where sunlight barely dared to reach. You felt the garden shift, an almost imperceptible breath passing through the leaves, watching, and you reminded yourself to keep moving, even as the invisible gaze tightened. Ahead, the terrace unfurled in muted light, its once vivid mosaics dulled beneath layers of settled dust, their faded patterns whispering lost stories. You traced a slow line along the chipped tiles, feeling a slight roughness beneath your palm, like the fragile bones of history resting silent beneath your touch. The garden exhaled a quiet breath, a chilly shiver that brushed your neck and sent a slow cascade of awareness down your spine. The fragrance around you deepened, heavy clove and burnt cinnamon weaving into the familiar scent of damp stone and wildflowers tangled with decay. You inhaled cautiously, fingers brushing a curled, dry petal that felt brittle, as if it might crumble at the slightest pressure. Every detail pressed against you, sharp, yet muted, like a fragmented promise slipping through time's fingers. The breeze carried a faint whisper, a rustling, not from wind, but from something alive just beyond reach, pulling your gaze toward the tangled undergrowth, where light fell shy. You stepped forward, careful to place your toes gently upon the smooth stone, the warmth of the sunlight still subdued beneath veiled clouds. The hedges formed a narrow passage once again, a living tunnel of gnarled branches that seemed to lean inward, swallowing light and sound. Each step was quiet. The soft crunch of leaves underfoot sounded like a secret revealed too soon. Your fingers brushed the coarse bark, rough and scabbed, and you felt the cold sweat of anticipation pooling across your chest. Halfway through the hedge tunnel, the air tightened. You slowed, breath deep and even, feeling the pulse of something watching, waiting. The shimmer of a shadow flickered just beyond your vision, vanishing each time you refocused. Your muscles tensed like a whispered warning. The garden held its breath with you. At the tunnel's end, you surfaced onto a shadowed courtyard, the floor a mosaic of broken tiles and fractured stone veins. It was colder here. The sun did not reach past the thick moss-covered walls, where creeping vines wound like veins, dark and pulsing with hidden life. You inhaled again, sharper this time, the smoke and spice now unmistakable. A smoky bitterness pulled taut beneath a hint of fresh pine and ancient rot. Kneeling at the base of a tall pedestal, you traced warnings plain in their impenetrable mystery. The stones hummed faintly beneath your touch, a vibration more sensed than heard, trembling like distant thunder beneath a fragile shell. A long sigh escaped the garden, rustling the broken petals at your elbow. Somewhere far off, a bird's soft wing beat fluttered, quick and light, carried away by the thick air. You rose deliberately, muscles stretched tight as you stepped toward the far corner, where the shadows pooled darkest beneath a twisted oak. The tree's bark was cracked and split, sharp edges of wood peeling like ancient skin. The scent of ash still lingered, stronger here, mingling uneasily with the faint, resinous sweetness of fresh sap breaking slowly from a hidden wound. There, pressed against the gnarled roots, you spotted something, a small fragment of fabric, dulled by dust and worn by time. Your fingers hovered, hesitant, over the ragged edge. The texture was coarse, rough against your skin, tinged with the faint electrical charge of unease. You glanced up, briefly. Beyond the tangled branches, the city bleached pale under the relentless sun. A distant murmur of life, far from this stillness. A breath caught in your throat as movement flickered at the periphery. The shadow from before, and yet not quite the same, shifted again, folding itself between branches with unnatural smoothness. Your heart slowed, steadying with a focus sharpened by quiet fear. It was neither friend nor foe, but something caught between, watching with unblinking patience. You stepped back slowly, the earth soft beneath your feet, a whisper of cracked stone and rotted leaf greeting each step. The heavy air pressed down, carrying an acrid tinge of smoke that wrapped cold and suffocating around your chest. Your gaze lingered on the figure until it blurred, fragmented by flickering shafts of light bending through the canopy. Then, as if sensing your hesitation, a faint sound stirred behind you, a soft, deliberate scrape of stone against stone, an echo both small and immense in the sacred quiet. You froze. The shadow figure edged closer, its form sharpening into something almost human, but made of silence and breath. Your skin prickled, every nerve alight with the distant crackle of tension threading through the garden's veins, and as the light dimmed further, stars beginning to pierce the slow fall of twilight, you understood that the night was no longer approaching. It had arrived, and it carried secrets darker than shadows, waiting just beyond your reach, You stepped back again, the faint outline of the shadowed figure lingering in your vision, like a blur caught between branches and fading light. The garden exhaled a deeper breath around you, thickening the air with the scent of burnt cinnamon and cracked earth. A warmth tinged sharply with something acrid that raised the hairs along your bare arms. The stones beneath your feet seemed to pulse with the secret heartbeat of this place, slow and deliberate, matching the rhythm you forced within yourself. Each breath careful, each movement weighted with intent. Your eyes traced the gnarled roots pressing into the cracked earth, noticing how the damp soil clung in clumps between your toes, cool and surprisingly heavy. The faint, distant rustle of dry leaves stirred, not from a breeze, but from the subtle shift of something unseen brushing just beyond your peripheral vision. You felt the tension coil tighter, like a spider ready to spring, but your steps remained slow and measured as you turned away from the looming figure. The garden's layered scents pressed in, the sharp sweetness of wilting petals folded into the deep musk of decayed wood and distant smoke, a taste lingering on your tongue with every breath. You moved towards the narrow corridor again, the hedges arching overhead like the ribs of some ancient creature, their thorns poised just out of reach, yet undeniably present, pressing stealthy warnings beneath your skin. The cracked marble beneath your feet was uneven. Some edges crumbled away, revealing earth softened by time and hidden history. A soft, dry scrape echoed faintly as your fingertip glided along the rough bark of the hedge, each groove and knot speaking of countless seasons weathered in silence. The muted sunlight filtered through cracks above, dappling the path in shifting patterns that played tricks at the edge of your sight, sometimes seeming to pulse, then retreat, as if the garden itself breathed with a slow, watchful patience. Your breath deepened, carrying the heavy perfume of crushed leaves and something tangy, like faint iron hidden beneath the earth. Ahead, you spotted a narrow opening between the entwined branches, almost concealed by a curtain of moss and hanging vines. The air here was cooler, with whispers of damp stone and a faint, lingering sulfur tang that sent a chill down your spine, though the sun's heat swelled behind you, pressing warm shadows along your neck. Stepping closer, your bare foot brushed a scabrous mushroom, clinging stubbornly to a mossy root, its form subtle but unmistakably alive. The corridor tightened further as you moved through, muffling sound until even the faint patter of your steps seemed swallowed whole. The garden's silence was thick now, a cautious hush that let your heightened senses pick up the faintest heartbeat, your own, as it thudded cold and steady in your chest. The distant stone drip you had heard before echoed again, irregular, like a slow secret falling into a long-forgotten pool. A sudden dry snap broke the tension, the brittle fracture of a twig somewhere just beyond the vine curtain. Your breath caught, steady but slow, motion restrained. You paused, barely daring to blink, as a shadow flickered low and close, like a sigh brushing the ground. The faintest glint of light caught in a pair of eyes, sharp and unblinking, shining with a quiet intelligence, as if reading the very movements of your soul. Your fingers curled around the cool bark, knuckles pale, as the garden held still again, suspended between moments, time stretched thin and fragile. The faint tawny light of late afternoon spilled uncertainly across the shifting leaves, turning the deep greens into a muted gray, the shadows long and softened at the edges. You inhaled slowly, the heavy mixture of earth and ash clinging to your lungs, drawing in a pulse of quiet defiance amid the heavy silence. Slowly, you eased forward, careful to avoid the dry leaves that threatened to betray you with their brittle crackle beneath your feet. You could feel the weight of eyes, many, unseen yet unyielding, folding around your form like a dense fabric woven of caution and watchfulness. The garden itself seemed to lean in, every leaf and stone a silent predator awaiting the slightest slip. Ahead, the narrow path opened onto a hidden alcove, veiled in half shadow. The air shifted noticeably here, cooler, tinged with faint resin and something metallic that made the hairs on your neck stand erect. You stepped carefully inside, the ground beneath soft with centuries of fallen petals and broken twigs. Centered within, an ancient basin carved from dark stone waited, its smooth surface cracked and stained, etched with faded symbols worn by untold years. You knelt beside the basin, fingertips tracing the carved runes slowly, reverently, each groove filled with whispers of promises and threats intertwined. The faint vibration beneath your touch thrummed lightly, like the pulse of the garden's hidden heart. Around you, the hush deepened, voices all but vanished beneath the crushing weight of the coming dusk. A sudden breeze stirred, brittle and cold, curling leaves at your feet and setting a faint ripple across the surface of the stagnant water pooled within the basin. The scent of smoke fluttered again, more urgent now, sharp with the bitter tang of burnt wood mingled with fresh pine resin. You shivered despite the warmth, clinging to you like a second skin, and rose slowly, muscles taut but controlled. From the shadows beyond the alcove came the faintest sound, a deliberate, scraping whisper against stone. Your eyes darted instinctively toward the source, but found only darkness, folded deep beneath the ancient branches. The figure, elusive and patient, remained just beyond the veil of leaves, its presence an unyielding weight pressing steadily against your senses. You stepped back from the basin, the chill of the stones seeping through your skin, grounding you. As you moved toward the edge of the alcove, the garden seemed to pulse around you, alive and watchful, endlessly patient. The sun's last light slipped away, and the distant city bloomed faintly against the swelling dark, fragile and oblivious to the slow power gathering in these silent depths. Your gaze fixed on the shadow once more, the faint outline of something neither fully there nor vanished, lingering like a breath held too long. The night was no longer a promise, but a weight settling on your shoulders, heavy, inevitable, and waiting. And as your heart slowed into the night's deep rhythm, you knew, with quiet certainty, that what came next would change everything. Though the garden, as always, said nothing. You stepped back from the alcove's edge, the ancient basin's surface glimmering faintly under the last breath of daylight. The carved runes pressed a whispered weight beneath your fingertips, their shapes seeming to shift ever so slightly, like shadows breathing in quiet rhythms. Beyond the cool stone, the garden's heavy silence settled around you. It was a woolen cloak, wrapping tightly and urging your senses to reach deeper into the stillness. The air hung dense with mixed scent, the sharp bite of burnt cinnamon softened by the fading sweetness of wildflowers crushed underfoot. You drew a slow breath, feeling the weight of the garden fold around your lungs, the faint tickle of dust and ash teasing at your throat. A chill threaded through your skin, despite the lingering heat of the sun, as if the shadows you glimpsed carried the memory of cold rain long past. Bare feet warming on cracked earth, you moved deliberately along the narrow path that twisted beneath the arching hedges. The leaves whispered softly, brushing against one another with a sound like silk sliding, barely there but constant, a susurration weaving through the thick air and setting your nerves slightly to edge. The scent of damp moss deepened, sweet and yet pungent, mixing with dry earth and faint resin that clung stubbornly to the shadows. Your fingers trailed slowly along the coarse bark of the hedge, each ridge and groove telling a history only silence could hold. The roughness grounded you, anchoring your scattered thoughts as the path bent sharply, funneling you into a smaller clearing shaded by towering oaks, with gnarled limbs stretching like arthritic fingers against the dimming sky. Here the light faltered, wavering between amber and slate, and the day's warmth traded places with the creeping cold of dusk. A solitary crow passed overhead, its wings beating heavy and deliberate, a stark shape against the darkening pale of the clouds. Its distant caw sounded like an echo from a forgotten time, a plea, or perhaps a warning. The atmosphere thickened, suspended between past and future, each breath drawn slow and insistent, weighed with promise and unease. You knelt to the ground at the clearing's center, fingers sifting through the brittle carpet of dead leaves and shattered twigs. There, partially swallowed by decay, lay a single bone, slender, bleached pale, with a jagged edge that bore subtle scars, like ancient runes carved by unseen hands. Your palm brushed it carefully. The coarse texture, cold and real beneath skin, that prickled with the surge of unspoken histories bound tightly to this place. The garden seemed to pulse beneath your touch, a slow heartbeat reverberating through cracked stones and twisted roots. You rose cautiously, with stirring tang of burnt wood sharper now, curling around the damp air like smoke from a fading fire. Somewhere close, the faint scrape of stone against stone tickled your ears, deliberate and patient, rising over the whisper of leaves, as if the garden itself breathed in anticipation. Your bare feet pressed back onto the mosaic path, the fractured tiles worn smooth by centuries of quiet footsteps, their patterns fragmented but endearing, like a half-forgotten lullaby. You walked with measured steps through the cooling shadows, the faint glow of phosphorescent moss casting an eerie green shimmer along the edges of the stones, lending the space an otherworldly glow. Ahead, the garden widened into a sunken terrace bordered by towering pillars, entwined with creeping vines. Their leaves clung stubbornly, dark and glossy in the dusk, streaked faintly with the silver-gray dust of years. You reached out with slow certainty, fingertips tracing the rough surface of one pillar, where faint carvings showed serpentine shapes coiling lazily into one another. Each line, worn soft, but still pulsing faintly under your touch. The scent here was heavier, a mingling of wet stone, rotting wood, and the distant tang of something metallic and cold. Your skin rose into gooseflesh. The balance of warmth and chill became a delicate thread you dared not break. A soft breeze wafted through the terrace, stirring the vines and carrying a hint of something new. A scent almost imperceptible, like jasmine folded with smoke, distant yet unmistakably alive. You lowered yourself onto the cold stone bench nearby, the weight of your body sinking into silence layered with dust and shadow. The garden's quiet stretched around you, a taut stillness that both comforted and restrained, a breath held between heartbeats. You closed your eyes briefly, letting your senses reach out beyond the fading light, tasting the cool air woven thick with histories and hidden dangers. When your eyes opened again, the shifting shadows framed a subtle movement at the terrace's far edge. A flicker of fabric, rustling like dry parchment, caught briefly in the gathered gloom before vanishing behind a pillar. Your breath caught, steady and unhurried, as the weight of unseen eyes settled fully upon you once more, patient and relentless. Rising, you stepped toward the shadowed edge, the cracked stones groaning faintly beneath your careful tread. The garden's pulse quickened, a low hum threading through the air, subtle but insistent, like the last whispered promise of a storm yet to break. The scent of smoke deepened, mingling with the earthiness of wet roots and the sharp hint of night-blooming flowers, heavy with nectar. You paused, gaze sharpening on the darkness where the movement had been. The air rippled with tension, a fragile weave of light and silence that held your senses taut and waiting. A faint glimmer brushed the corner of your vision, a star-like flash from eyes too steady to blink, watching beyond the boundary of sight. The garden exhaled slowly, as if acknowledging your presence, its ancient breath mingling with yours. Your heartbeats synchronized with the rhythm of shadow and stone, slow and deliberate beneath the fading sky. And then a single note shattered the stillness, a whisper of fabric torn, soft but unmistakable, and you knew the garden's secrets had begun to unravel, thread by silent thread in the gathering dark. You stepped away from the alcove's edge, your skin still tingling from the basin's cold stone beneath your fingertips. The carved runes seemed to pulse faintly, as though breathing in rhythm with the slow cadence of the fading light. Around you, the garden exhaled a thick, silent breath, heavy and expectant, its ancient heartbeat settling into the twilight. The scent of burnt cinnamon clung stubbornly to the air, mingling with the musty decay of crushed petals and timbers long rotted away. You inhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the world fold into the hollow spaces within your lungs. Your bare feet pressed cautiously into the cracked earth, each step measured and deliberate across the uneven path that twisted beneath bowing hedges. The rough grooves of bark whispered beneath your fingers, a history written in silence. Above, the sky shifted in gradients of dusk, amber fading into a soft slate as the last brittle rays surrendered to the encroaching gloom. A solitary crow cut through the air with slow, deliberate beats of its wings, its mournful caw echoing like a distant call through the thick shadows. You felt yourself tighten, senses sharpening as the garden leaned in, silent, watchful, as if weighing your every move. Ahead, the narrow path narrowed further, swallowed gradually by twisting vines, heavy with moss and the faint scent of smoke. You stepped lightly, careful of curled leaves, brittle enough to snap beneath your bare toes. The hush deepened, thickening until every sound, your own breath, your heart's steady murmur, was amplified, becoming a tentative pulse in the enveloping quiet. Near the path's end, a sudden snap cracked the stillness. Your breath caught and hung, suspended like a fragile thread. Your gaze locked toward a shadow, shifting softly among the branches. A flicker, just beyond the corner of your vision, where light dimmed and shadows gathered thick. The faint glint of steady eyes greeted you, unblinking and alert, reading the slow movement of your body. The delicate weight of your presence. Your fingers tightened on the rough bark for balance. Heartbeats sliding slow and low beneath your skin as anticipation stretched slender and taut. The dusk cast muted shades over the ancient mosaic underfoot, now softened by moss and dust. Time hovered, elongated by silence. Unexpectedly, the path opened into a hidden courtyard, cool and shaded beneath towering oaks whose gnarled limbs curved like the arthritic fingers of forgotten gods. The floor beneath your knee was littered with brittle leaves and shattered twigs, dry as old bone. You knelt and brushed aside a cluster, revealing a slender fragment of bleached bone, carved faintly with marks that rippled beneath your touch. Runes tangled in mystery, whispered warnings pressed through centuries of neglect. The weight of unseen eyes pressed heavier as the garden's breath faltered, carrying with it a faint swirl of smoke, cinnamon, and something sweeter, like the sharp kiss of chilled pine resin. You rose slowly, muscles taut under skin prickling with the creeping chill. Your gaze swept across the terrace that stretched beyond, bordered by ancient pillars coiled in thick vines, dark with age. Your fingertips traced the worn stone, snakes curling lazily in carved spirals, lines softened but still alive beneath your touch. The air hung thick, a mixture of wet stone, rotting wood, and a metallic sharpness that made your skin bristle alive. Nearby, a faint ripple disturbed the surface of a shallow pool, scattered with fallen petals, their edges curling inward like whispered secrets retreating into shadow. The breeze picked up, stirring the vines as it carried a scent folded deep with jasmine's subtle sweetness and smoke's bitter tang. You sank onto a cold bench, dust settling beneath your weight. Around you the garden's silence stretched taut, a sharp contrast to the heavy warmth that clung like a shroud. Eyes, countless invisible, tracked your every breath, turning the stillness into a dense web woven from quiet tension and whispered threat. When your eyes opened again, a flicker of movement caught the edge of your vision. Fabric fluttering softly, brittle as dry parchment, dancing briefly in the brushed gloom before vanishing behind a pillar's shadow. Your breath steadied, slow and careful, as you rose and edged toward the terrace's far boundary. The cracked stones groaned faintly beneath your steady steps. The garden's pulse quickened, an almost imperceptible hum threading through the air. A slow vibration, resonating with the secret heart, beating beneath stone and root. Smoke thickened, wrapping the scent of earthiness with something darker, mingled now with the rich nectar of night-blooming flowers. Heavy in their secretive scent, you lingered on the threshold, senses taut, breathing in the layered hush where light dimmed unevenly. A glimmer brushed the corner of your eye, a sudden flash like twin stars caught in shadow. Eyes steady and unblinking watched from the darkness beyond the edges of sight, holding a patient vigil. The garden exhaled a long, slow breath, folding ancient secrets into the space between you, and then a soft, tearing sound. Fabric splitting almost imperceptibly, cut through the silence. It was a thin thread pulled tight, fraying slowly across the layered quiet. Your heart surged, slow and heavy, as the garden seemed to lean closer, its ancient breath a solemn promise. You turned your head, just enough to glimpse the figure there, a shadow shaped like a question mark against the deepening gloom, still and waiting, made of breath and absence. The night pressed down softly around your shoulders, cool and inevitable, carrying the weight of unspoken truths. As your gaze held the shadow's patient watchfulness, you felt time splinter, a thin crack forming in the veil that separated the known world from the dark edge beyond. Somewhere just out of reach, an ancient secret began to stir, quiet but relentless, weaving through the garden's depths with slow inevitability. And you knew, deep within the stillness, the story had only just begun to turn. The shadow lingered beyond the twisted branches like a sigh caught between moments. Your breath slowed, controlled, as the low pulse of the garden settled into your skin. The fading light clung in shattered patches on cracked stone beneath your feet, weak but persistent as a last ember. Every leaf, every cracked tile, carried the weight of silence, heavy as a stone pressing quietly against your chest. You stepped forward, careful to set each bare foot with deliberate softness. The texture of earth and stone, a muted conversation beneath your skin. The garden seemed to watch with a patience older than the sun, its breath slow and measured, folding the crushed petals and dry leaves into the stillness. The scent of burnt cinnamon lingered faintly, mingling now with the richer musk of damp moss and cold earth, a quiet perfume that settled deep in your lungs. Ahead, the narrow path bent between darkening hedges, their leaves glossy but brittle, like the thin skin of an old wound. Your fingers moved along the coarse bark with slow reverence, feeling the roughness cradle your touch, as if holding secrets hidden in the mutations of the wood. The shadows deepened around you, swallowing sound until the faint scrape of a distant stone became a fragile thread in the thick air. A sudden breath stirred among the leaves, soft, a careful exhale carried by a breeze that shifted the dust in lazy spirals. You held your weight still, fingers tightening imperceptibly on the cold bark. There, in the corner of your vision, movement flickered again, a dark shape dissolving into the folds of shadow. Your heart slowed, steady now, muscles loose but alert, each step measured like the tick of a silent clock. The path opened into a secluded courtyard, shaded heavily by ancient oaks, their twisted limbs like the gnarled hands of time itself. Here, the air grew cooler, thick with the scent of rot, mingled with fresh pine resin, resin slowly bleeding from a hidden wound in the bark. A single crow cut across the dimming sky, its wings beating deliberate and slow, a steady rhythm echoing through the stillness. You knelt at the center, cold stone beneath your knees, covered in brittle leaves and scattered petals, curled like forgotten words. Your fingers sifted through the fragile layers, brushing aside dust to reveal a slender bone fragment, pale and weathered with tiny, cryptic markings carved by hands long vanished. The weight of unseen eyes eased slightly, replaced by the distant echo of a soft wing beat, fading like a whispered farewell. Rising slowly, you felt the chill press deeper into your skin as shadows lengthened and intertwined like fingers folding over one another. The scent of smoke sharpened, layered now with the bitter bite of crushed cloves and the lingering sting of ash carried faintly on the breeze. Your gaze drifted across the terrace where weathered pillars were entwined with vines dark with decay, their surfaces grooved with serpentine carvings, worn smooth, but still pulsing faintly beneath your fingertips. Before you could settle, a delicate ripple disturbed the surface of a shallow pool nearby. Fallen petals trembled, floating in slow circles, their edges curling inward like secrets retreating from light. The breeze whispered again, stirring the leaves and carrying a subtle sweetness. Jasmine folded into smoke, an invitation and a warning intertwined. Heavy in the quiet, you lowered yourself onto a cold bench, the stone rough beneath you as dust slipped away like forgotten memories. The garden's silence thickened, alive with invisible watchfulness. A flicker of movement caught your eye. Thin fabric, brittle as old parchment, fluttering almost unseen near a crumbled column. Your breath slowed further, merging with the garden's slow pulse, steady and deep. Stepping toward the terrace's edge, your weight shifted carefully on the fractured stones, each step a soft murmur beneath your feet. The air tightened, weaving smoke and earth into a dense shroud. Night-blooming flowers exhaled heavy nectar scents that settled like a warm cloak around your shoulders. Sharp and sweet all at once. Your gaze honed in on the shadow, a vague outline moving with patient stillness beyond the edge of sight. Eyes, unblinking, ancient, held a vigilant calm, watching between the folds of dusk. The garden exhaled, folding its ancient breath into the space where you stood, and time stretched thin, fragile as a wing beat. Then, a soft tearing whispered through the silence. Fabric, stretched past its limit, pulled slowly and frayed at the edges. A quiet but distinct sound in the gathering dark. Your heart faltered, heavy and measured, as the garden seemed to lean closer, its breath a solemn promise, wrapped in shadow. You turned slightly, catching a clearer glimpse of the figure. an indistinct shape, both there and not, poised between presence and absence. The garden pressed close, cool and inevitable, its weight folding over your skin like a shadow's embrace. A part of you tensed, expecting flight or fight, but your limbs remained still, anchored in the murmur of stone and leaf, the slow cadence of the night deepening around you. Then, from the depths of shadow, a faint whisper broke free, barely more than a breath, a sound not quite human, slipping between the trees like a sliver of silence with sharp edges. Your eyes locked on the motion, senses taut. The figure shifted once again, revealing nothing, yet suggesting everything. In that moment, the garden drew a slow, shuddering breath, a ripple that echoed beneath your skin and reached outward like a pulse. And beneath the cloak of night, where shadows wove and secrets stirred, you understood. This was only the beginning of something far older, darker, and deeper than the garden itself. The air thickened, and in that tightening space, the silent watcher stepped forward, just enough so the faint glint of an ancient token caught the last breath of dying light. Your breath hitched. The night held its secret and waited for you to choose what came next. The shadow dissolved into the deepening dusk, retreating at last beyond twisted branches and creeping vines. You stood still, the weight of the garden's silence settling gently around you like a soft shroud. The slow twilight seeped into every cracked stone beneath your feet, and the last whispers of burnt cinnamon mingled with the night's cool breath. The air no longer pressed against your skin, with suspicion but softened, as if relieved to finally exhale after holding its ancient secrets so tightly. As you stepped from the alcove, the rough texture of mossy bark met your fingertips once more, a familiar anchor amid uncertainty, from the carved runes etched long ago to the wilted petals resting silent on the stone. The garden, in all its twisting beauty and hidden dangers, had revealed its truth in hushed riddles, and now, in the quiet's embrace, you felt the steady pulse of completion beneath your bare feet. Your path led you gently back through the hedge tunnel, no longer a corridor of watching eyes, but a passage of memories folded in the rustling leaves. The faint whispers you had sensed before, the restless breath of shadows, had softened into nothing more than a cool gust weaving through branches. The city beyond, dim and distant, pulsed faintly with life as the first stars kindled in the deep velvet of the evening sky. Kneeling at the terrace's edge, you traced the edges of cracked mosaics, the faint glow of phosphorescent moss lighting the patterns worn smooth by centuries. The fragile bones you had found lay still beneath a scattering of dry leaves, their mysterious markings now less forbidding, symbols not of danger, but of passing time and the steady folding of stories. You allowed your fingers to linger a while over the weary stone, feeling the soft rhythm of ages calming beneath your touch. The figure that had watched you, The silent guardian draped in shadow had slipped away, dissolving into the garden's fading light, leaving only a trace of that ancient token glimmering, half buried in dust. It was a reminder, quiet and certain, of a pact made long ago, of something beyond sight but felt deeply, like the slow pulse of roots beneath the earth. You breathed in the cool air, letting the tension unravel, the sharp sense of smoke and spice finally retreating into softer notes of wild jasmine and crushed petals. Your bare feet carried you forward, moving lighter now. The cracked marble stones beneath held fewer secrets, only the quiet echo of footsteps past and present. The garden no longer felt like an enigma, but a living memory, breathing stories into the dusk. The tangled vines whispered a farewell, their shadows folding back to rest until another time. Behind you, the ancient fountain murmured again, its water trickling serenely over worn stone, softly singing the end of its long watch. You paused to place a gentle hand on its cool surface, feeling as though the garden itself exhaled a final, peaceful breath. The air shimmered faintly, carrying the delicate balance of life reclaimed. Decay and bloom mingled as inseparable partners in the passage of time. Looking up, the city lights blinked faintly on the horizon, a fragile pulse beneath the vast sky. Somewhere distant, a nightbird called softly, weaving its quiet song through the branches. The garden's twilight now felt less a warning and more a hush of rest, not just for the plants or stones, but for you too. Your fingers brushed once more over a delicate bloom just beyond the terrace, a fragile, curling petal catching the moonlight, trembling with the soft wind. It was a promise of renewal, hidden within the garden's worn beauty, a secret folded into the quiet cycles of life. You inhaled deeply, the scent settling in your chest like a whispered benediction, wrapping you in calm. The shadows stretched long and slow, blending with the night in a gentle embrace. The hidden watcher, the silent tension, the cryptic messages, all had faded softly into memory. What remained was the steady, comforting rhythm of time itself, measured in the cool breath of earth, the delicate song of water, and the slow dance of stars overhead. As you took your final steps along the garden's path, the heavy scent of dust and dry earth gave way to the soft, comforting scent of evening bloom. The garden, a world apart, yet deeply intertwined with the pulse of life beyond its walls, had shared its story and then quietly returned to sleep beneath the spreading sky. You paused for a moment, feeling the cool stone beneath your feet and the calm weight of night settling around you. The garden's hush was no longer a burden, but a balm, a lullaby woven from ancient roots and whispered promises. The long day drew to a close. the fading light folding gently into night. The city below softened beneath the stars' watch, and the garden breathed slowly, peacefully, its secrets safely cloaked once more. With a last deep breath, you stepped forward into the coming darkness, the quiet settling into your bones, carrying with it the soft weight of ending and the tender promise of rest. Tonight, the story closed, a door gently eased shut, leaving you cradled in the silence, ready to drift. And as the shadows lengthened and nightfall wrapped around the world like a silk sheet, the garden's quiet held firm, a sanctuary not just of stone and leaf, but of stillness and peace. The story rested now, its secrets folded back into the earth, waiting patiently for the dawn.